is slightly different. Basically, the investor holds a controlling interest that is not based on the majority of voting shares. And a variable interest entity has a primary beneficiary, and that's the person that holds the most variable interest. We're going to talk about that more a little bit later with this NEPI. So, variable interest entities are most common among financial institutions with their subprime mortgage-backed securities. Variable interest entities can be utilized as special purpose vehicles to let firms avoid having to list all of their assets and liabilities on their balance sheets. The major issue with variable interest entities is that they frequently are the go-to method for hiding certain factors like subprime mortgage exposure or subprime exposure. On all of your business law papers, you guys talked about the Great Recession. Well, leading up to the Great Recession, there was a subprime mortgage crisis where banks basically gave out these loans that people probably couldn't pay back, and they did. So what they did was they used these special purpose vehicles to hide that exposure, to basically to bypass the existing regulations regarding minimum capital ratios. So they were able to not look over leveraged, and we all found out that wasn't true. Okay, now this is just FASB number FIN 46. FIN 46 is FASB's interpretation of the Accounting Research Bulletin 51 that deals with the consolidation of variable interest entities, which we'll be talking about more in depth later. Federal securities law requires all publicly traded companies to report financial and operation information. And then relationships with variable interest entities must be disclosed on their yearly annual financial reports, or 10Ks, that they file with the SEC. And then FIN 46 outlines the accounting rules that apply to such businesses. And now Danny is going to tell us about other stuff.
Variable interest. Now, what is a variable interest within the context of variable interest entities? Well, a variable interest results from an economic arrangement that gives the reporting entity a right to the risks or the rewards of the entity. Think of benefits and costs. Now, variable interest can take many forms, including equity, such as shares in a company, debt investments, guarantees, and we're going to see a couple of examples about guarantees, derivatives, and leases, among others. Now, I'm going to write a couple of examples on the board. And of course, I can't move this. So assume we have entity A, which wants to lease a piece of property, a piece of equipment to entity B. Now, to do that, it creates entity C, which is going to hold that piece of equipment. Now, and then you release it, right? And now, let's assume that this is an operating lease, and in order for entity B to get better rates, B guarantees a certain residual value at the end of the lease. Now, by making that guarantee, now B has a variable interest in entity C because it stands to absorb the risk or the benefits created by entity C. Meaning, if by the end of the lease term, the residual value is actually less than what B guaranteed, now B is going to have to cover that difference. So it's taking on that risk. Now that's and that whole economic arrangement, it's the variable. It's what creates the variable interest. Now another example would be, let's take a step back here. A wants to lease a piece of equipment to B, but doesn't have it yet. So it creates entity C, and now entity C is going to look for financing to purchase that equipment, right? Wants to finance that purchase. Now entity C, being a newly created entity, it's going to be very difficult for it to obtain that financing. So A has to step in and guarantee that financing, right? Basically saying, well, if entity C defaults on those payments, we'll make the payments. So by making that guarantee, entity A now stands to, absorb the risk in case, say, C is never able, he purchases the equipment, but he's never able to lease it, and it defaults. Now A has to take over. And I mean, it's not always, it's not only the risk in that economic arrangement. It could have been arranged that the proceeds obtained from that lease flow to A. So in that case, A would be absorbing the benefits. So those are variable interests. One last thing. Now notice that more than one entity can have a variable interest in the variable interest entity. So in this case, the lessee has a variable interest, and also the lessor, or in the case of, say, the bank or the investors, they also have an interest in this entity. So each entity needs to determine whether they are the primary beneficiary to see if they need to consolidate. Now, Ms. Nevi is going to talk more about the primary beneficiary.
Who is the primary beneficiary? The primary beneficiary refers to an entity that consolidates in a variable interest entity. If the company is the primary beneficiary of the entity, the holdings of that entity needs to be disclosed on the company's consolidated balance sheet. Once the company determines that the entity is a variable interest entity, can no longer use the voting interest entity model. The primary beneficiary of a variable interest entity is the variable interest holder deemed to have the controlling financial interest in the variable interest entity, and therefore must consolidate. It is not necessarily needs to have the majority of the voting of any of the voting in the interest of that entity. Rather needs to have meet the following criteria. The power criteria, which is the power to direct activities that has a significant impact on the variable interest entity benefit, economy's performance, and the obligation to absorb losses, or the right to receive benefit that could potentially be significant to the variable interest entity. Also, the primary beneficiary doesn't need to be a legal entity, it also can be an individual that holds interest, variable interest on an entity. So now Andrew is going to explain all the consideration.
So I'm going to explain the factors that decide whether a variable interest entity is subject to consolidation. Okay, number one, if the total equity at risk is not sufficient to permit the equity to finance its activity without additional subordinated support. So provided by any parties which include the equity holder. And if the equity investors are lacking one of the following. So if the equity holders are missing one of the following, if the equity investors are lacking one of the following, the power to direct the activities of an equity that most significantly impact the equity economic performance through voting rights, meaning that they lack the voting rights to direct activities by the entity. If the obligation to absorb the expected losses of the entity, the right to receive expected residual returns of the entity. So if they're lacking one of these three, then they're subject to consolidation. Okay, I'm here to lastly to explain the procedure to consolidate the variable entity interest. So it's similar to consolidating a normal two businesses. You have the asset, the liability, and the non-controlling interest. It's the same that we did in the homework, remember? So you have the total consideration, and then you have the value of and then you have the value of the non-controlling interest. You combine all of those, you combine those two, and you have the total consideration. So if the total consideration is greater than the fair value of the net asset, you have goodwill. If it's less, you have gain on purchase, right? I remember that?
Yeah,
I
sure.
don't. So let me show you an example. Just like a homework. So you have the land, you have the building, you know, if the building is 10,000, so these are 10,000 more, 10,000 less than the book value. So there's a gain. So once we identify the asset, you apply the whatever left over is the goodwill. So, you know, I have a goodwill, you have a controlling interest goodwill of 40,000, non-controlling goodwill of 10,000, overall goodwill is 50,000. So it's similar what we did in the homework, it's very straightforward, and that's how that's the procedure to consolidate a variable interest